Well, Dennis, we largely categorize the economic systems of our world into two different varieties or camps. On one hand, we have the market-driven capitalist system, which obviously we've experienced for centuries here in the West. And then on the other hand, there's the command-style economy, which of course has been the mainstay of socialist and communist movements, over the last 70, 80 or 90 years or so. And those two camps really have also fed into the real cultural and political divisiveness that I think we have seen even just more recently. As Christians, rather than play the left-right game that furthers that divisiveness even more so, should we be looking for a way that transcends, or a model, an economic model that really seeks to rise above that cultural divisiveness? And what would an economic model that's based on biblical principles look like?
That is the $64 million question, proverbial.
Maybe billion.
Yeah, at this point. Well, let's do what is almost never done. Let's go all the way down to the basics of economic systems. And in this context, in the school, and those that are with us are going to be experiencing the phenomena of truth intention. That a truly biblical economy would be an economy that has got the proper balance of the tension between individual liberty and the differences in people in terms of education, skill sets, and choices, as contrasted with the need for civil government to be involved in some ways in the regulation of the process of the way that the market is managed, so that there's honesty, there is not monopoly where choice is really not determined, but it is bullies prosper and the weak don't. So over the decades, and it took me decades to do this, I've eventually developed something I call the 12 master principles. Number one being transcendence, which deals with what's the big picture from God's point of view about any subject we want to discuss. And I set that up so that right near the absolute top, transcendence being the top, the next two principles are choice and reciprocity. And choice and reciprocity is the tension, economically speaking, between a so-called free market economy where individuals and their personal desires and private wants, etc., it determines what they're willing to pay for and buy. And it allows people to start companies out of their own skill sets, their own calling, whatever. They're not asking permission, although they need to be overseen for common law, hygiene, labor laws that are biblically proper. You've got that dynamic which drives the creation of capital, because choice gives me the opportunity to work as long as I want, as hard as I want, and to inject as much investment of time, energy, and resource into whatever I'm doing as I want to do. Nobody is telling me to do that. My creativity, my passion. Jan and I had a small business for 5 years before I went into the ministry. It was a huge gift, from selling the accounts all the way to the eventual sale of the business, and what was involved in birthing out of free choice. I'm not compelled by anything except what was internal to create that. And reciprocity is that we are always looking at the effect of what we are doing, so to speak, in the creation of work and purchasing, whatever else, with a sense of justice and compassion, i.e., love your neighbor as yourself. So economics, to be biblical, has got to be the proper regulation and the proper balance between the massive amount of energy of people's collective choices determining what they want to invest in and what their inputs are going to be, versus socialism, which is more based on making the welfare of the entire community have to be involved in the decisions that are being made. Now, what makes socialism such an economic killer, so to speak, socialism has never worked and never will work the way that it is being offered, because it isn't true reciprocity. It is actually being driven by the idea that a smaller number of people have got to be the strategists who are responsible for economic activity, because the people are too stupid, they're uneducated, they're this, they're that, they're whatever. They don't have the skill sets to manage the creation of the right amount of food production or the right amount of money, taxation money, and where it should go. It's got to be the elite that are making those choices. And that is what we roughly refer to as a command-based economy. Now, the ultimate problem vis-a-vis the creation of capital, which is another way to talk about profit, that is not consumed by personal spending, but is reinvested back into the economic market in order to create more jobs, more people being cared for, et cetera, is creativity and choice is infinitely more powerful than being commanded to produce something. And anybody that ever has worked in a job that you really didn't want to have, but you needed the money, you're not going to be creative. You're not going to go home thinking about how you can do a better job. Whereas in the choice-based side of this, you are married, as it were, to the choices that you have made, and therefore the return that you're going to get on the investment of economic activity that is driven by creativity and choice is going to be ultimately way more productive than sectors of the economy that are jobs that somebody else basically has forced you into by collective choice from the experts. I hope that I've made that clear. That is why choice has got to be what drives the economy, but reciprocity has got to be where the justice demand is. And primarily, how do we empower those on this side of the equation who may not be as ambitious, as educated, as skilled, as disciplined, or whatever, that they're using and exercising those gifts that God has given them? How do we make sure that their activity is not leaving this sector of the economy, i.e. love your neighbor as yourself, who may not be as skilled, may not have had parents who taught savings and the work ethic? You got all those differences. So choice makes us free and productive and creates capital. And reciprocity is concern for how do we make sure that these people on this side of the equation, the government, etc., is making their decisions based on what the market itself is creating as economic activity, that their strategy is wired into what is actually being created in the free side of the sector, while at the same time making sure that laws are passed that regulate what should be regulated. So I hope I've made an overall description. I've never heard a single president of the United States talk about basic economics. It drives me crazy. We've got all this economic discussion going on in the ivory towers, but the common man or the common woman or the political choices are being made with people who don't really understand the dynamic, the tension, and why is capitalism so much more filled with discretionary income and higher lifestyles than those which are command-based socialist economies who want to attack this, take the assets out of it, and try and equalize these two sides when they can never be equal. And here's the key. Because the investments of this side are coming in with a whole lot more energy, excellence, and desire for growth than the work energy over here that is not going to give special income based on differences of the investment.
Yeah. Dennis, this is so helpful because you talk about the fact that most people in culture today don't understand these terms. Our political leaders aren't necessarily framing the issues around these terms, and so generally speaking, we leave it to the people in the ivory towers to take care of for us because we just don't understand. So how in the world, Christians are supposed to engage a conversation around what biblical wisdom, how biblical wisdom should be applied to these discussions when we didn't even understand the terms either?
These provocative questions, Simon, you're setting me on fire. Well, because where you're taking us right now in this line of questioning takes us back to the Neoplatonism that is in the church, which separates spirit from matter. And since money and economics is about the management of the material world, and most Christians don't think the Bible has any legitimate conversation about managing the material world, let alone complicated economics, we have a real problem here.
We do, and I think the dualistic mindset can be, well, let's understand the free market economics and what the basic tenets of those are. Let's understand the command style economy of Marxism and understand what those tenets are, and choose which one we want to be a part of. And of course, obviously, we're going to choose the tenets that are in the free market economy. But even so, we distinctly miss the unique contribution that rises above that choose one side or the other. So give us an example.
So, brief history. In my years at Berkeley, and my academic background is in political theory, political philosophy, and culture. And economics was a sidebar that I chose to make a huge issue with, because economics is the net summation of the way a culture is working and the amount of freedom that is in it by the free choices that are being made in the market. So I don't have a degree in economics, but my experience with economists is most of them, I know it's going to sound bad, have no clue of what they're really talking about, because economics is about the management of value systems. It's much more ethical and philosophical than it is mathematical. And you and I could talk for hours, but I'll just say this. Those of you that are my victims here in this school, okay, what you're going to get in doing business God's way and everything related to that was my struggle to create a viable view philosophically of how God wants to manage the issues between the choices we make and the effect those choices have on other people, and the inequalities which are inherently involved when freedom allows different results because of different inputs. There's no way you can get justice if you have two people working for very different wages with very different inputs and skill sets in their jobs. The dentist, the brain surgeon is going to make a whole lot more money than the guy that's digging ditches. And he's not exploiting the ditch digger because he made the choice to put in 12 years of hard training to get those skill sets. The investment into an activity is going to determine the return you get. And socialism wants the same return with very different investments. And we're trying to make sure that as we talk about doing business God's way, again, we're dealing with the tension of the choices that I make have got to include reciprocity. That is, how do I take the money that I get, the amount of money that I want to invest in other people, how do I manage that wisely? So I'm not giving people fish unless they need fish. I'm training them how to fish. And therein is reciprocity. And then we would get, and I know we don't have time in this short moment, we would get into taxation. Because what I advocate as justice, economic justice, is that when we make taxation differences between different classes, what we should do is reduce the percentage that the wealthy pay based on how many new jobs they are creating and how much education they're giving to the side of reciprocity. Go ahead, be a billionaire. But I mean, God may have given you all the skills, and he may have given you an assignment that you're going to need billions of dollars to do socially. I mean, God does that. But at the same time, we must invest in the choice side of all this, how much we're going to put and how wisely we're going to do empowerment more than charity for the sake of those that need more return than they're really able to get at their skill level without being poor.
Right. So what you're advocating for is a responsible capitalism, a compassionate capitalism, as opposed to this driving for profit being the bottom line. Dennis, this is so helpful because I think what it does is it helps us as Christians recognize the importance of being able to understand looking at the issues from a completely different perspective and understanding what the motivation is for seeking empowerment of others, what the motivation is for seeking property and capital creation and so on and so forth. And in this time and in this era where both the left and the right are really entrenching into their own camps and not able to even begin to see from one another's perspectives, they've lost the ability to actually have a dialogue. And I think that us as Christians, we carry, I think, a sane desire to achieve both justice and capital creation, but we're approaching those things from a completely different motivation, which enables us to really, I think, engage in a conversation and be winsome to both sides.
Totally agree. But like all things, we have to identify what do we mean by the terms.
That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
In order to have a valid conversation, we have to go down to the basement of the conversation. What do the words mean? And what are the value systems that are underneath the economic theory that we're advancing?
And that's precisely why we're doing this program at Bridgepoint Forum, because it's all about understanding the terms from a biblical perspective and challenging our assumptions to get out of that left-right game or get out of the worldly thinking, so that we are really being pressed into biblical wisdom and compassion for others as we seek to be change agents in the world. So thank you for explaining that to us today, Dennis.
No, the joy is mine.